I remember multiple times coming to you and be like, I'm lowering my pricing. And you're like, you're not lowering your pricing. I'd be like, I need to lower my prices. You're like, you're not lowering your pricing. Because that's what, as a woman, we immediately think. We think, oh, this is too expensive. I'm not worth it. I'm not enough. And in actuality, there's likely something else going on. Welcome to the Locker Room Talk podcast. My name is Reilly, a small business owner and host of this podcast. I am joined by my co-host and your corporate executive insider, Stacie Miller. Together, we bring you the business resources and knowledge that have traditionally been held secret in the locker room of the good old boys club. Every single week, we invite you to break down the locker room door with us to chat about the development, marketing, sales, and operational knowledge you need to grow and scale your small business. Stacie, tell us what is on the game plan for today.
Today, I'm pretty pumped because we're going to be talking about a really crucial part of business development, part of our overall development pillar, the concept of product market fit. If you listened to our last episode, we started to dig into this, but today we go even deeper and really define what product market fit is and why it matters to you. We also lead in a little bit about the marketing funnel, which I'm really excited to keep talking about in future episodes as well.
This is going to be such a valuable episode. Every time I listen to you talk about like marketing and product market fit, I just learned so much. So super excited. Before we jump in today's episode, we're going to do some small talk and start off with the question of the day. So Stacie, our question of the day is, did you always want to be in tech? Or is that something that you kind of just happened upon?
Full transparency, I did not dream of being in tech. And I think that the people in tech are probably split, where some are on this track and go to business school and do all the things to go straight into this type of environment, and others kind of take a more meandering path there. And that was definitely me. In one of our other episodes, we talked about kind of our first year of our careers, and I actually started in the health and fitness space. I went into the outdoor industry briefly, and then I came into tech. And I don't regret it. I absolutely love my career in tech. But yeah, I didn't mean to start here.
How would you define tech? For people who are not in tech, what is tech?
Oh my God, such a good question. The term tech is just thrown around. Tech is the technology industry, and that means technology, software or hardware or services, anything from like the computer or the phone that you might be listening to this podcast on, to the software that we use to record this podcast, to your email account, to e-commerce and online shopping sites, everything that is the technology space that we interact with every day. That's all under the umbrella of tech. And so you could imagine it gets pretty diverse within that tech umbrella. For me, I specifically have worked in technology that supports other technologies, or having worked in Google, but there's also like biotech, medical tech, there's marketing tech, there's lots of different subcategories.
So interesting. I know Google is tech. That's the first thing I think, but I didn't know what else tech encompassed.
Yeah. Okay, what about you? Did you always know that you wanted to get into nutrition?
I shared a little bit on the last episode that I originally thought I was going to go to medical school. Like I always loved food as a child. Like I don't know, I wasn't like a foodie, but I just like loved food. And then, as I started to progress through soccer, I went through puberty. I started to get a really bad relationship with it, became obsessed with it for a different reason. It's like sometimes when you're on the outside looking in, you don't always understand your negative relationship with food. So I was a little obsessed with it, but I wanted to go to medical school. And then as I took my gap year between undergrad and then going to grad school, I realized how passionate I was about nutrition and helping people overcome a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the disordered patterns that I had. I've always been somebody who's really interested in like things work and like the why behind things. I was always good at the sciences because I wanted to understand like the mechanisms and the patterns behind things. Once I started to excel in science classes, I started to get pushed towards the medical route.
Yeah.
Oh, you got an A in Orgo. Like, you should go to medical school. I'm like, okay. You don't know when you're like 19.
Totally. That's so fascinating. I'm glad you found your own path to where you're at today because you're helping so many women.
Thanks. Me too. Yeah. Everything happens how it's supposed to happen.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm super excited about today's episode. I feel like I say this every single episode, but I just am so passionate about this and I have such a good time recording with you. So let's jump into today's episode. On this episode, I'm going to get super vulnerable and share with you a lot of the mistakes that I made when I was first starting my business.
I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like you've learned so much and you really have a growth mindset because you've made those mistakes, but you've always taken them in stride. So I'm pumped that you're sharing your personal experience today.
I'm about to cry right now. Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your help. This is why I'm super excited that we're having this conversation because these conversations are not being had. And that's what we're trying to do with locker room talk and then also the locker room community. We're trying to provide these resources and have the tough conversations that women have been not allowed in for so long.
Absolutely. I'm so excited about our locker room being a safe space for these conversations to happen and to empower women through these spaces.
I'm going to be sharing with you one of like the biggest challenges and mistakes that I made during my business. And Stacie, I want to hear from you too during this initial story because you watched me do a lot of this. Something that I really struggled with at the beginning is I believed that if I put a product or a service on the market, people would want them. And I believe that if I just like showed up on social media and said, "Hey, I'm offering nutrition services," people would be like, "Sign me up." And yes, I started on social media in 2015. 2015 Instagram was a lot different than 2026 Instagram. But even then, I remember being so shocked and so disheartened that I didn't have 1,000-person wait list because I had, 10,000 followers on Instagram.
I found it so interesting when I started working with you to learn a little bit more about that like invisible side of social media. Like I'd heard about this, I'd read about it, but to see your following and see how many people engaged with you on social media. At one point, I was supporting you on some of your social media posting and DMs, and so many people were interacting with you, and so few were signing up for your program. It was really eye opening for me around how social media folks were struggling to make that connection between their free space and their paid space.
Yes, and we will definitely talk a lot about that in future episodes and personally why I don't really care that much about follower count now. Yes, it's important, but my mindset has completely changed because again, I made this mistake myself and the dietitians that I've supported with building their business are making kind of the same mistakes or having that same light bulb moment where you think followers or just putting a product out there is going to equate to sales. And because I had really bad money mindset and I had issues with mindset around pricing, I was charging minimal amounts of money per month for my services. I still always thought it was my pricing when it wasn't my pricing. That wasn't the problem. And then, it just becomes this downward spiral of like low self-confidence, low pricing, not getting clients, and you want to give up in your business.
It's so true. And it's so fascinating to watch this type of thing happen. It happens in corporate America too. And one of the things we often say in corporate America is we never want to get into a race to the bottom. It's the same thing on social, where you never want to just be posting constantly and regurgitating content constantly just to have the consistency on the platform. It's like this race where everybody wants as many followers as possible, as many likes as possible, but those don't equate to dollars for most folks. And then you're racing to the bottom on your paid thing because you want somebody to buy something from you. But it's really, really important, especially in those times of feeling alone or feeling like you're failing to hold firm on your price floor. And obviously, we'll talk about that more. But I think you experienced this firsthand.
Yes. And I remember like multiple times coming to you and be like, "I'm lowering my pricing." And you're like, "You're not lowering your pricing." You're like, "I need to lower my prices." You're like, "You're not lowering your pricing." Because that's what I feel like as women, we immediately think. We think, "Oh, this is too expensive. I'm not worth it. I'm not enough." And in actuality, there's likely something else going on. And we talked about in episode 2 the concept of product market fit. And I would love for you, Stacie, to define that again for us because oftentimes there's a problem product market fit wise, not pricing wise.
Absolutely. In a previous episode, we also talked about this relationship between price to value, and we'll get back to that, but that starts with your product market fit. So, product market fit, just to again talk about what this actually means, we're going to break it down word by word. In corporate America, companies will spend months or even years developing their product market fit. When we think about this, I like to start with the word market first when I'm defining it. Your market is just like where you're selling your product, who you're selling your product to, and why that person, geography, demographic would want to buy it. Your product, it's not just a physical thing. Like often when we hear the word product, we think of something we buy in the grocery store or when we go buy a physical thing, like a big purchase like a car or a small purchase like a candy bar. A product is generally the thing that you're trying to sell when we talk about product market fit, and that includes things like services. When we think about small businesses, most small businesses are actually selling a service versus like a storefront of physical products. And that service is often actually your individual expertise. And so when we think about product market fit, it's almost an equation of defining what that market space is, defining what that thing is that you're offering, that product in this case, and then how those fit together. And that creates your space that you're trying to win what we call market share or just gain revenue growth in.
With small business owners, I often feel like there's such a focus on the product, but not on the market. A lot of people have it backwards, where we're so focused on the service or the product that we want to offer, but we haven't tested the market to see if the market wants it. And that was something I had a disconnect with when I first started.
Yes, we worked through this with your business, and you've built an incredibly successful business over the years because you had the humility to keep trying and acknowledged when things weren't working. But I think one of the toughest things for folks to understand in practice, like you can hear it over and over again, but to understand in practice is that your product isn't about you. It's about your end customer and what they want. What's in it for them? What's the outcome they're going to achieve? Is it even like quantifiable, for example? Because then you really get a strong inclination for somebody to want to buy this thing. It's all about what's in it for them. And so when you're thinking about your product, we're so in the weeds around our product development, but you also have to think about like what's the outcome the person gets from using this product. I feel like you're nodding. Do you have like good examples? I feel like you do.
I just see this so much. And when having conversations with other business owners, we all fall into this trap. And sometimes it can be a really hard pill to swallow because we think that it is representative of ourself and it goes back to our self-worth. Like, I have this product, I have this good idea, and well, the market doesn't want it.
Totally. And I think that it's so fascinating because it's also like you can have a really great product, but if it's not defined in terms that your niche understands, then they're not going to understand how to buy that thing, how to interact with that thing. I've worked with some small businesses who have this like brilliant idea about how they want to name different components of their business, but the names are so confusing to like the layman, the person out there in the world that I'm like, you have to change all of your names. And like you said, they almost think of it as attack on their self-worth. And so you really have to decouple your individual self from your business. And you have to start thinking about what does my end user want?
Yes, I have an example from the nutrition space. I commonly hear from other business owners that they want to focus on education in their business. They want to provide education for athletes, which we always need more of that, right? But if your goal and your passion is providing educational sessions, there's not going to be a market for that in professional sports because that's not what nutrition is in a professional sports setting. In professional sports, it's food service, communicating with chefs, one-on-one meal plans, right? There's not going to be room or time for educational presentations and consultations unless you have a very, very specific niche and you are very specialized in a certain space. But you're not going to get floor time with a professional team to do an educational presentation on general sports nutrition. And if that's your passion, that's fine, but the market isn't professional sports teams.
Absolutely. I remember when I was working with you as a nutritionist, which we'll have to talk about that someday because it's a great story. But I was working with you, and at one point, I wanted to learn how the like amino acid chains worked. And you had a presentation from grad school that you were like, I have a presentation, I can walk you through it. And I was like, why don't you teach this to everyone? This was before we worked together in a professional capacity. And you did have the foresight to be like, this is not what my market wants. Like, most people don't want this level of detail. They just want to know how to eat without being obsessed with food or how to get their period back in your later stages of your business. And so you did have that insight about what your market wanted, but you had to build that over time.
And it takes a lot of time and it can be
Yes.
very humbling because we think we have a great idea or you come from a full-time job where you did educational talks and you had one-on-one consults, and then you move into this private practice space, and it just is different now because the service or the product was provided before, but now you have to try to get an outside business to pay for that additional fee. It's very humbling, and I do think that you just continue to learn a lot as you start to really hone in on product market fit.
If I bring it back to those concepts again, product market fit, you also need to define them a little bit independently at first, and then you can start studying the relationship between the two. Because if you're trying to define your internal concepts about your product in the same language that you want to define your marketing language, it doesn't usually work. You need to be able to talk about what your product is in terms that make sense to you, and then you need to be able to translate that to what your customer wants to hear. And those are two different sets of words. They're two different languages almost.
I loved your example, a couple examples back, where you talked about naming something in your business and it makes so much sense to you. And then looking at, does this make sense to your outside market? We've made this mistake multiple times where we've tried to name things like, oh, the community and the program and the guide and the handbook and all of this stuff, where people don't know what that means. It's crystal clear to us within the business because we work in it day in and day out. But people who are interested in potentially purchasing from us have no idea what we're talking about.
Exactly. Exactly. And so it's like you can name those things inside of your business, those words, and that's totally fine. But you have to think about what your market wants to hear. And that takes a little bit of research. And we've talked about AI on other episodes. We'll continue to talk about AI on episodes. This is an opportunity where if you don't have a sounding board, you can go to AI and ask, like, what are the trending terms? What language should I use to define these things? What are the most common words to define XYZ? But you do want to do some of that work only once you've defined your internal product and your internal market parameters.
For those business owners who are listening right now, who are interested in re-looking at their products and their market, where would you recommend that they start?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always try to start with product first, even though in the definition I started with market. Define your product. So sit down, pen and paper, or on a doc, but you're not using AI tools or anything up front. You're just trying to write down what is your product. In our newsletter, the game plan, we'll have some additional parameters around this, but you basically just want to write down, what are you offering? Like, what are you selling? It doesn't have to be super clean. You just want to write down what it is. You want to define it. Then you want to define your market and you think about parameters. Like I mentioned before, who are you selling the product to? Why that person or company type? What geography are they in? What demographic? What age? Maybe what gender? Like, whatever makes sense for your specific product or service, try to think of as many of those parameters as possible to define your market. Only once you do those two things can you then take those, maybe use AI to help you and try to figure out, like, what's your market space.
I just want to be real with y'all and give you a heads up too. This is not a one-time process. I've
No.
been in business full-time for over 5 years, and we do this like every quarter, constantly relooking at the products that we're providing and then the market that we're attempting to sell to.
And I'll say in corporate America too, at startups I've consulted with and worked at large companies I've worked at, they're doing this constantly also. This is an iterative thing that any good business is doing on a really regular basis. And it aligns to how fast you're growing. So the faster you grow, the more frequently you do this. Also, if you're brand new, you're doing it frequently because you're trying to grow fast. So expect, like Reilly said, to do this once a quarter. If it's not working, maybe more frequently. But I will caution against doing this like weekly or even monthly. Sometimes you do need to finish testing your current hypothesis before you iterate on it.
I always learn so much. I'm like, okay, well, maybe we need to reassess if we're doing this monthly. I don't think we actually are, but I do feel like we are moving very rapidly. If people have started to develop their product, they started to outline their market, what are some metrics or some ways to see that it's aligning and it's working?
Oh man, we could do a whole episode on this as well. But you start to think about your market in, at least in corporate America, we think about it in a funnel where the top of the funnel is really broad. And we're just trying to figure out, like, are people engaging and aware of our thing? And that's often where, if you're on social, for example, Those likes and follows are a helpful indicator of people's engagement. Again, that doesn't equate to dollars, but it's a helpful indicator of general brand awareness. Are people starting to DM you? In corporate America, we think about, are they engaging on like specific events or webinars? That point, you can start to see that conversion into a paying customer.
I just learned so much, and I feel like this is going to resonate with so many small business owners because we're doing these things sometimes and we don't even realize that we're doing them.
Totally. They're so organic. And I think what's so interesting is corporate America just has defined a lot of these things with terms, but it doesn't mean that it's inaccessible to small business owners. And you don't have to use these terms to think about it. It's just helpful frameworks to like kind of verbalize what you're maybe already experiencing and see like, oh, I do have a gap in that. I just never had a way to explain it before.
I know we just covered a lot of ground today regarding product market fit. And you might be sitting there with a notebook full of ideas, but overwhelmed with no clear starting plan. This is exactly why we started the Game Plan, the Locker Room's free weekly newsletter. Every Tuesday, we take these big level business strategies like the product market framework we discussed today, and we break them down into a quick game plan for you to implement in your business. Think of this as your free weekly business audit from your coach. No fluff, no AI, just actionable tools you need to make sure your product or offer is actually what the world is asking for. If you're tired of shouting into the void of Instagram, and you're ready for a direct line to the strategies to grow, head over to lockerroom.com, which is lkr-room.com, and join us. I just learned so much, and I feel like this is going to resonate with so many small business owners because we're doing these things sometimes and we don't even realize that we're doing them.
Totally. They're so organic. And I think what's so interesting is corporate America just has defined a lot of these things with terms, but it doesn't mean that it's inaccessible to small business owners. And you don't have to use these terms to think about it. It's just helpful frameworks to like kind of verbalize what you're maybe already experiencing and see like, oh, I do have a gap in that. I just never had a way to explain it before.
Hey there, it's Reilly, just rounding out today's episode. If you are tuning into the Locker Room Talk podcast for the first time, you might be wondering why you're hearing me again. And that's because I'm here at the end of every single episode to give you a little TLDR or recap to make sure that you're taking away the same main points that I did. As a fellow business owner and entrepreneur, I understand how overwhelming and frustrating this journey can be. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. After I edit every single episode, I'm going to be on here sharing with you the main points and takeaways that I was able to gain from talking with Stacie on this episode. Today, we continued the conversation on niching and why product market fit is so important. This is something that I really struggled with when I was building out my steady state performance nutrition side of the house, and a mistake that I want to make sure that you avoid. If you want to continue the conversation on product market fit, make sure that you're tuning in to our free newsletter, The Game Plan. The Game Plan is going to come out every single week, and it's going to be tips and tricks on how to grow your small business straight to your inbox. I can't wait to see you on our next episode, which is going to be a banter episode where we break down the importance of having a LinkedIn.